Hey everyone, I'm John Bozek with Electric Bike Report, and in today's review I'll be talking about this mighty moped-style e-bike, the EUYbike S4. We've had a pretty steady influx of similar e-bikes over the past few months, and if we think of electric mopeds and electric bikes as two different types of machines with some really blurry dividing lines between them, each of those bikes we've tested falls in a different spot on that spectrum. The S4 here finds itself a lot more firmly on the moped side of the spectrum because of some of its specs, and with a price tag of around $1,500, we were really curious about the bike's ability to balance that price with features and performance. Spoiler alert though, this thing is awesome. Stay tuned while I go over the bike's performance and our testing, but first let's cover a few of its major features, and then I'll talk about its specs and components. Stick around. Before we get started, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. This helps support the channel and makes it easier for you to see more of our content when we upload new videos. We are always talking about awesome e-bikes like the EUYbike S4, and we'd love to help you find the one that's just right for you. The biggest highlights on this bike, especially when considering its price, are its ridiculously powerful 1,000-watt rear hub motor and its unrestricted speeds. We were able to get this thing over 30 miles per hour, which was an absolute blast, but it means we have to address a few things right up front. E-bikes are typically divided into three classes that are determined by their motor wattage, their maximum motor assisted speed, and whether or not they have a throttle. These classes help to determine where e-bikes can legally be ridden. The S4 here falls outside of that three-class system, so it's not likely going to be legal to use on roads as it ships. We are big advocates for safety and legality, so where the bike is marketed for street use, we'd prefer to see EUYbike ship it as a Class 2 or Class 3 e-bike with the ability to unlock it to higher speeds at the customer's discretion. As it is, we recommend checking your local laws and regulations to find out what you'll need to do to meet the necessary requirements if you want to take this bike on the street. Those regulations are going to be a little different everywhere, and they might range anywhere from just limiting the bike's top speed through its settings menu to getting a license with a motorcycle endorsement and registering the bike through your local Department of Motor Vehicles or similar. This thing is definitely a worthy street bike though. It has solid range, which we'll talk about later, and it's just really comfortable to ride. This big cushy saddle is great, and we love that there's a full suspension here too. That combination, along with a massive battery, makes the S4 really well suited to longer rides, and the inclusion of knobby fat tires gives it some solid off-road potential too. I mentioned earlier that we've seen a lot of this style of e-bike recently, but this is definitely among the most affordable. In such a competitive market, there are usually some trade-offs to get prices so low, but we were really surprised to find that this bike felt and performed like something with a bigger price tag. Let's dive into the S4's specs and components next. As I mentioned earlier, the S4 uses a full 1,000-watt rear hub motor with 96 Newton meters of peak torque. On our test bike, we have this huge 48-volt, 20-amp-hour battery on the down tube, which translates to 960 watt-hours of capacity, but we found out that this is actually an older setup. Our contact at EUYbike said that the newest batch of S4s each come with even better capacity. Those should be 25 amp hour batteries with an absolutely wild 1,200 watt hours. We'll talk about the range possibilities with such a big battery in our range test section later, but let's keep things moving for now. The S4 has a 7-speed Shimano drivetrain with a tourney derailleur. This is one obvious area where there are some cost savings, but the system did fine for us, and I liked seeing a full cassette instead of a single-speed freewheel that some moped-style e-bikes use. Of course, there are those 20-inch by 4-inch fat tires. The S4's webpage doesn't include a more detailed spec, but ours were made by Kenda. These have some nice chunky tread for off-roading, and they handled some rough dirt paths just fine for me. That rear suspension helped out a lot too. We've got a hydraulic disc brake system on 160mm rotors. There's a slight discrepancy here with the bike's webpage, which says they should be Tektro. Ours are made by Logan, which is a brand we were unfamiliar with until recently, but they've been solid when it comes to performance. I mentioned the bike's super comfortable saddle already, but I want to point out this seat extension section on the back. This piece, as well as the fenders, are extras that, at least right now at the time of filming, are freebies included with the bike. I'm not a huge fan of the gap between the seat pads, but as long as you're able to fit on one side or the other of it, you shouldn't have a problem. There's also a tail light with a brake light on the back end of the bike, and then of course the huge front headlight. It's really cool to see the running light on the front that's always active as long as the bike is turned on. And then of course you can turn on the actual headlight, which is really nice and bright. Considering the S4's speed and street capability, once it's set up to meet legal requirements, we would have liked to have seen turn signals here. We've tested some other moped-style bikes that, while they were more expensive, did include turn signals, and that's really nice for just being able to communicate on the road with other drivers. We do have a really great looking dual crown suspension fork on the front. This, like the rear shock, uses a spring instead of air and oil, and it's a little bouncy because of that, but again, that helps to save on cost, and it's way better to have than not. Plus it just looks cool. Moving up to the cockpit now, we have a pretty straightforward layout that, for the most part, I actually liked a lot. The bike's display is black and white and doesn't do anything flashy, but I did appreciate the percentage-based battery readout instead of a bar-based one. The BMX-style riser handlebar is a cool fit here too. The left bar has the bike's control panel and buttons for its horn and lights. The right bar setup is great with a half-twist throttle and an over-the-bar Shimano shifter for the turny drivetrain. I'm usually not a big fan of this particular shifter, but at least on this bike, I changed my mind. It really works here with the twist throttle. The grips were generally comfortable, but personally I felt like they were a bit too short, although I do have pretty big hands. But for me, taking a hand off the bar to indicate when I wanted to turn felt a little sketchy, so that's another reason turn signals would be great, but longer, more textured grips would probably be a decent alternative to help out with one-handed stability. I want to take a second to point out another big but not so obvious feature, and that's the fact that a ton of this bike's settings can be changed through its settings menu, which is accessed by hitting both the up and down buttons on the control panel simultaneously. I mentioned earlier that you can limit the bike's top speed, but you can also do things like deactivate either the throttle or the pedal assist system, or change how many pedal assist settings it has, or even change the throttle so it can't take off on you when you're stationary. This is a much bigger range of customization than we typically see, and at least some of these features might be able to help you to make the S4 street legal depending on where you live. With the speeds at which e-bikes are capable of traveling, it is crucial that they have effective brakes. To evaluate brake systems, we pedal every e-bike we test up to 20 miles per hour and then hit the brakes to stop as quickly as we can while still maintaining control. We measure the distance it takes the bike to stop, repeat the process 2 more times, and then calculate an average stopping distance from those results. So as I mentioned in the last section, the latest version of the EUYbike S4 should have Tektro hydraulic disc brakes on 160mm rotors. Again, ours were made by Logan, so your results might vary with the Tektro setup. So far we've been pleased with the performance of Logan systems though. They've done a good job, but we are still evaluating how long they last. With our 3 sets of test data, we calculated an average stopping distance of just 18 feet 11 inches, which is currently the best performance we've seen on a moped-style e-bike, and is even slightly under our current running average across all of the e-bikes we've tested. So whatever Logan is doing with their brake systems, we like it. For us, the S4 felt nice and stable when braking thanks to its 4-inch tires, but its back wheel did have a tendency to lock up and slide a bit. This was a little noisy, but otherwise not a problem. For our circuit test, we pedal every e-bike around a 1-mile loop made up of 4 right turns and a small 30-foot hill. We do this first with no assistance from the motor, and then again in each pedal assist setting. This gives us an idea of the bike's motor engagement, its handling, and its speeds at those different PAS settings. We were surprised to find that with no motor assistance, the EUYbike S4 pedaled surprisingly well. 11.3 miles per hour is pretty decent for our first lap, especially considering that many of the moped-style e-bikes we've tested are pretty heavy and difficult to move without help from their motors. This bike weighs about 76 pounds, including its battery, which isn't too bad in comparison. Now, it's interesting to note a few discrepancies between the speeds that we measured in our testing and the speeds advertised by EUYbike. The S4 uses a cadence sensor to trigger motor output, and as with many e-bikes that use sensors of that type, this bike has speed limits in each of its PAS settings. These will naturally vary a bit based on rider weight, but for example, we measured an average speed in our PAS 1 lap of about 16 miles per hour, but the S4's webpage states that this should top out around 10 miles per hour. Regardless, the average speed we measured gives the S4 a really practical level of power in its first setting, and each setting above that just packs a bigger punch. The data you're looking at shows a bit of a taper at the higher end of the bike settings, but we didn't actually feel that on the bike. This was more of a result of the limitations of our test circuit. The bike actually got up to speeds that were a little higher than we felt comfortable taking corners at, so while we often were going well above our measured average speeds, we put on the brakes to take turns a bit slower. The S4 is pretty responsive in its handling, but the dual crown fork limits its turning radius a bit. It does take corners pretty smoothly when you lean into them though, and its tires are nice and grippy, plus you have the throttle to help you power out of curves. I didn't mention this before, but most of the time throttles are limited to 20 miles per hour, and that is definitely not the case here. The S4's throttle will take you just as fast as you can get through pedal assist. There was one feature of the bike that we noticed in this test that wasn't so awesome, and that's that its cadence sensor is a bit slow to pick up both initially and after you hit the brakes or coast. This wasn't a huge deal since the bike is pretty easy to pedal without motor assistance, but it is something to be aware of, and ultimately it would be nice to see a more responsive cadence sensor in the future. Overall, we thought the bike's power was distributed well throughout its settings, and at least for now, we actually got our fastest result ever in our loop with the S4 in PAS 5. This thing was just an absolute blast to put through its paces here. Our range test is actually 2 separate trials where we pedal the bike until its battery runs out. The first test is done in the lowest pedal assist setting that provides constant input from the motor, and the second is done with maximum assistance. For each test, we measure the distance the bike was able to travel, and we compare that to the range advertised by the bike's manufacturer. So I mentioned previously that the battery on our test bike had a capacity of 20 amp hours or 960 watt hours, which is less than the 25 amp hours or 1200 watt hours that brand new S4s will ship with. This means that our results for this test are likely going to differ from what a bike with the larger battery size would be able to achieve. We measured a distance of just under 28 miles with the bike in its max assist setting of PAS 5, and a distance of just under 49 miles in PAS 1. EUY advertises a range of about 44 miles using just the bike's throttle, which we did not test, and up to 75 miles in PAS 1. Now again, we have to account for some discrepancy with the different battery capacities, but then also the differences in speed that I mentioned earlier in PAS 1. With our measured travel of around 16 miles per hour, the bike was drawing more power from the battery than it would at 10 miles per hour, so it's no surprise that our results were substantially lower. Regardless though, when comparing the S4 to other moped-style e-bikes we've tested, it's still near the top of the list because it has such a honkin' huge battery, and the results we measured will still take you a pretty serious distance, so we're generally pretty happy with our results. To test every bike's hill climbing ability, we take them to a local hill called Hellhole, which is a steep but paved path that's 1/3 of a mile long with an average grade of 12%. This is a pretty serious challenge for most e-bikes, and some that we test don't make it all the way to the top. We do this test both in the max pedal assist setting and with just the throttle to see if a bike has what it takes to make the climb. The S4's results in this test are definitely a bit unexpected. With just its throttle, the bike took 1 minute and 40 seconds to make the trip with an average speed of just 10.8 miles per hour. Its result in PAS5 with some added leg power were much better with an average speed of 14.5 miles per hour and a time of 1 minute and 15 seconds. Considering the bike's 1,000-watt motor and 96 Newton meters of peak torque, we expected to see better results here, but this sort of a situation is exactly why we do this test. And ultimately, the bike still made the climb successfully, so we really can't knock it too much. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, our goal for this review was really to evaluate if the EUYbike S4 effectively balanced its price tag of around $1,500 with a good variety of features and decent performance. After our testing, I think it's really clear that this thing just leans into speed as its main draw, but I was really happy with how many other great things it has going for it. The S4 has pretty solid range for a bike that keeps its speed roughly between 15 and 30 miles per hour. Its brakes did a fantastic job, and it comes with a full suspension and chunky tires for a pretty awesome ride feel both on and off the road. Sure, you're probably going to need to jump through some hoops to make the bike street legal, but the huge variety of customization you can achieve through its settings menu is likely going to help you out with that at least a little bit, in addition to just being super cool. We'd really like to have seen turn signals included on the S4 for even better electric vehicle functionality on the road, but we also understand that trade-offs have to be made at such an affordable price point. The EUYbike S4 is a truly awesome machine at a truly incredible price, and I've got to say that if you're looking for an affordable electric moped that looks great, goes fast, feels comfortable, and can handle some off-road riding, you're gonna love this thing as much as I do. Thanks for sticking with me through this review. If you'd like to read more about our experiences on the bike, please check out the link in the video description, which will take you to our written review at electricbikereport.com. We'll also leave a link to the EUYbike website where you can check current pricing on the S4 and pick one up for yourself. Before we go, if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. It really does help us to grow and share more content. We'd love to hear from you in the comments section too, so let us know if you have any questions and what you thought about our review. That's all for today. Again, I'm John with Electric Bike Report, and this is the EUYbike S4.